This is Steve Zeltzer with KPFA WorkWeek Radio. Assembly Bill 5 in the state legislature of California is aimed at forcing companies to pay their independent workers benefits such as workers' comp and Social Security. This bill is now being debated in the legislature. And we talk with Constatine Anthony, a driver of Uber in Los Angeles, and Bob Schoonover, who is president of SEIU 721 and the California SEIU.
Hi, my name is Constatine Anthony. I'm a driver with Uber, and I've previously driven with Lyft. I have just over 15,000 rides combined on both platforms.
So how long have you been a driver?
I've been driving for about 4.5 years. I'm closing in on 5.
And initially when Uber and Lyft developed, a lot of drivers were pretty excited. They thought that they had a future with Uber and Lyft. What brought a change in your thinking about the way the company operated?
Well, I mean, we still believe there's a future with Uber and Lyft. We believe the platform and the technology itself is, although it's a disruptive technology, it is the future of transportation. That hasn't changed. Our big conversation that's happening is how the companies treat the workers. That's the crux of our new change in thinking.
And how do they treat you and other drivers?
Well, I'll give you a comparison. At the beginning, 4.5 years ago, the companies were scrambling for drivers, and they were trying to get cars on the road, and so they treated us very well. They paid us well. Our rates were almost 2.5 times as much as what they are today, and the basic communication between the driver and the company was a good one. It was a healthy conversation. Today, 4.5 years later, the driver's pay has dropped. The unfair deactivations have risen. They will cancel our account for any reason, for no reason at all. It's been very tough for us to, as drivers, be secure in our income, secure in our daily understanding of, well, we're going to go to work and we're going to get paid today. So it's been very tough for us to maintain some level of decency and respect as a worker.
And how much has your income dropped over the last couple of years?
So for me personally, in 4.5 years, I've done the numbers. Like I look back at my old hourly rates and today how much I make per hour, and I've dropped about 22% personally. I know other drivers who were working even before me, because, I mean, these companies have been around almost 6 years. They've seen pay drops 30, 35, sometimes 50%, depending on what platform they were driving, if they were driving an SUV or if they were driving a town car, that kind of thing. So it's been really tough for these guys. I know I have a friend who he bought a luxury sedan 5 years ago to drive the luxury version of Uber, the Uber Select. And he's now simply just driving around carpool people going to the airport back and forth. And it's not anywhere near the promise that they gave him 5 years ago when they told him, hey, if you buy this car on your own, we'll pay you well.
And many workers have gotten these cars, have bought these cars based on the fact that they thought they would be making a good income with these companies. Is that an issue for the drivers?
The drivers I know who fell into it, they feel it was a deceptive practice on the company's part. And even now, Uber and Lyft, they've partnered with third-party companies to rent out these high-end cars, to rent out new vehicles at really high interest rates. I mean, you can go to a used car lot and get a better interest rate on these automobiles, but they've given you this idea that you don't have to put any money down, you just pay as you go from your paycheck, and there's drivers who are getting suckered into it. I mean, folks who will move to the area and can't find work immediately, so they get into this system of, I'll just rent a car real quick from the company, start working, and then they get into debt, and they have to work to pay off that debt. I mean, they've created a modern-day debtor's prison with these car rentals.
It sounds like slavery. You're stuck and you no place to go. Now,
yeah, and so that's a very deceptive practice. I mean, that's not the core of what we're mobilizing against, but it's part of the issue. If they had just simply paid us what we were promised as pay rates, we could go out and we could just buy our own vehicles and pay for it on our own.
And so they have argued, the company Lyft and Uber, that you're an independent contractor and basically you should not be an employee. Now, why don't you talk about AB5 and what that has meant to you and what you see the future of that, the Supreme Court decision, California Supreme Court decision, saying that you're really employees?
Okay, so before I get into AB5, the idea that we are independent contractors, I think it's a false narrative that the companies have come up with. If you talk to anybody else who actually is an independent contractor, like, say, a plumber or a professional hairstylist, you ask them, what do you do for a living? They say, oh, I'm a plumber or I'm a hairstylist. Whereas if you talk to any of us, you say, what do you do for a living? The driver will respond with, I drive for Uber, right? They give you the company that they work for. It's a very different idea and mentality and relationship. We are much more like an employee-employer relationship because we just work for that company. And so AB5 is now trying to come along and say, if that's true, if the relationship between the driver and the tech company is that of a closely aligned employer-employee, then that's how they should be classified. Because, I mean, I don't go out and, hawk my driver wares to any other tech company who's out there. I drive for Uber. That's what I do. So I'm their employee, and I should be treated as such. And the fact that we don't have any employee protections, just standard, state protections that all employees get as independent contractors, puts us at a disadvantage. So I think AB5, once it comes through and once the California state legislature moves forward with it, us as drivers are going to see a much better relationship between us and the companies we work for because we are their employees.
Well, the company has argued that if you are made employees, they will have to pay a lot more money, and right now they're subsidizing the ride so that they really don't have a good business plan to continue to exist if they have to treat the workers who drive for them as employees.
Well, I mean, that's on the business end. I can't speak to what's going on behind their closed doors. I just know how the tech comes out on our phone, and I just see what's happening on the road as we interact with our riders and as we just go about our daily grind. We do need to be paid more. I mean, that's, base number one, and we do need better employee protections. We get no pension, no benefits, no health care. There's no protection against an unfair deactivation, simple stuff that if you, went to a regular 9-to-5 job, or you would get those. And so as a driver, I'm not too concerned with how these billion-dollar companies who make, millions and millions of dollars in profit for their CEOs and their, chairman of the boards, how they deal with that pay scale. But I know that they have enough money to start paying us more, and they have enough money to start providing benefits. So for us, I mean, we're not asking much. $15 an hour for our base rate plus $15 an hour for expenses, because they know they don't own the cars. We own it, so we pay for maintenance and upkeep and repairs. And so the idea that they have to somehow take a huge loss, it's not a lot. It's really not a lot. 15 and 15 is not much.
And they've been using their mobile devices, their platform, to lobby, to get the drivers to lobby. What did you get a message from them saying you should take a position on these issues?
Yeah, they sent me a message a couple days ago that said, we want to hear from you. And it's like this adding your name to a signature thing. And both Uber and Lyft have sent it to their drivers saying the other company is also in on it. So, like, I got a letter the other day that says Uber and Lyft drivers are coming together to ask lawmakers to take action and support a better path forward for rideshare drivers. And it's funny that they're trying to do that because that's what the drivers are already doing, so it seems disingenuous. And coming from the company line, it rings false, right? If you went to work every day, your boss is never going to come to you and say, hey, we want to get everyone organized so that we pay you better. Your boss is never going to.
Doesn't sound too logical. So what do they want? Do they want an exemption for Uber Lyft drivers in AB5?
Well, from what I've heard, and this is just a personal anecdote, I've heard that there's a couple of groups that are looking for exemptions, like, highly paid medical doctors or the hairstylists that I mentioned before, because it's like a weird, funny thing that's happening with them and independent contractors and such. But the fact that a giant billion-dollar company with thousands upon thousands, I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of drivers in the state, would look for some exemption to a law that is basically come about because of their practices. It's preposterous. I mean, they're the reason why we're pushing for AB5. So if they're looking for an exemption from AB5, that's laughable.
So you're going to be going to Sacramento, and what are you going to be saying to the legislators there?
Well, actually, I was there just a couple weeks ago. I talked to a few assembly members and a few state senators in that lobby, and it's interesting to see the lawmakers in their office wanting to talk to the drivers. I've never seen such a large bill come through this state where everyone involved has never had the experience of what they're talking about. So, most lawmakers, they come from, good homes, and they were either lawyers or city council members or whatever, and they got into that position. They've never been independent contractors. They've never been rideshare drivers. A lot of these, assembly members and state senators have been in that office longer than Uber and Lyft have been a platform. So it was eye-opening to just sit down and explain to them how my job works. I actually have to download an app in front of an assembly members on their phone and log in as them and show them how to call a car because they didn't know how to do it. They have one of their staff members do it.
I see.
And it was amazing to watch them try to wrap their head around how this new disruptive technology works. And the fact that so many of them don't know how it works means that they're unaware of how these companies are skirting the law and creating loopholes for themselves. And so it's just so very important to get the drivers in the room, to get the driver's voice amplified, talking to lawmakers, talking to people on the ground, getting the message out.
And you are not alone. Obviously, there are many other workers who work for similar platforms, and as temporary workers, as gig workers. What do you see the future? Because it seems more and more workers are in this situation of being reliant on companies for temporary work, and at the basically you only work when the company needs you.
Yeah, so when I was lobbying up at the state, I bumped into workers for Postmates, the delivery service, the Handy, the Maid service. There are all these other smaller gig worker type apps that are very excited. The workers are very excited to see the Uber and Lyft drivers start and hold this movement because their voices, although much smaller, are just as important. And so what we're trying to achieve with AB5 and with this gig economy overall is protections for all these workers so that the next time a new tech company comes along and creates a new industry, they still have to abide by the rules we're setting in place now. A lot of the issues we're seeing in the gig economy is that because it's new, because there aren't laws written for it, these large tech companies are skirting labor laws, employment protections, just stuff that's been on the books for 100 years. And we're trying to reset that balance.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us on WorkWeek Radio. We've been talking with Constatine Anthony, who's a long-term driver with Uber and Lyft, and he's been talking about the lobbying effort of AB5 and the conditions and issues that drivers at Lyft and Uber face. So thanks for joining us on WorkWeek Radio. Or Constantine.
Thank you so much.
This is Steve Zeltzer with KPFA WorkWeek Radio. I'm here with Bob Schoonover. He's president of SEIU 721 and also the California SEIU. And we're here to talk about the growing issue of AB5 and the situation of workers at Lyft and Uber and what labor is going to be doing about it and is doing about it. Welcome to WorkWeek Radio, Bob.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Bob, why don't you talk about what is planned in Sacramento, but also why the SEIU has taken up this issue of the conditions of the Uber and the Lyft drivers?
Well, SEIU in general has always been about raising standards and wages, like the Fight for 15 campaign that we waged here in the state of California a few years ago. And workers in the state in general, especially platform or gig workers, whatever you want to call them, get really taken advantage of by the companies that they work for. And they get taken advantage because they're all considered contractors up till now. And now we've had the Dynamax decision, so that has kind of moved the floor.
And this Dynamax decision, what exactly was it?
That was a state Supreme Court decision that classified a group of workers who were considered contractors. They classified them as employees, is my understanding.
And the issue of, would this allow unionization of the Uber and Lyft drivers?
Well, we get to AB5 now as it comes to that. And AB5 by itself, as it is proposed right now, would not necessarily create that pathway because they're not considered employees at the federal standard, just the state of California.
And the companies, Uber and Lyft, are lobbying their drivers. What do they want to do with this AB5 bill?
Well, I think they want to keep their business model as close to what it is today as humanly possible.
And what would you like to see in the SEIU as far as this bill?
Well, we would like to see workers have a voice and get what AB5 says, but they really need a voice at their workplace.
And what does a voice mean? Does that mean unionization? I mean, I thought that normally would mean a voice of workers having their own union.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
So this situation of independent contractors has been going on for a long time. There are millions of workers, FedEx workers, there are millions of workers who are basically working for companies as independent contractors. Does this threaten the whole independent contractor category?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, okay? And I wouldn't say that it probably threatens everybody that's categorized as an individual contractor. But I think it is a threat to people, that, for lack of a better word, that are doing the same work for the same company day in and day out. I think that doesn't really fit the definition of a contractor.
And nationally, the issue of deregulation, the issue of making workers independent contractors, this has been going on for decades and decades. So you have literally millions and millions of workers who are working for companies like FedEx and others, classified as independent contractors, working for the same company. Do you think that this should be a national issue, the ending this independent contractor clause for people working for the same company?
Well, I think it should absolutely be a national issue that workers are getting taken advantage of by working for the same company day in and day out and not having the same rights as employees have.